Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. The other day, my friend Bob at the channel Robert G. Reader of Books posted an original, it's a tag, an original tag entitled the To Reread or Not to Reread tag. And he made this video because he wanted to open up a discussion about rereading. Who rereads? Why do we reread? What does rereading, bring to a text? And so I'm just going to read what Bob said in his video. He says, a perennial topic among booktubers and readers in general is whether it's worthwhile to reread a book or is it just a waste of time. It's a question I don't think has ever received its own proper formal post, that is, one with prompts. If it's already been done, no offense intended, I'm not trying to take the wind from anyone's sails. Here's my take. So Bob tagged me in his original discussion, and so I'm going to give it a go because I am an avid rereader and I have definite thoughts about these prompts. So number one, do you reread fiction? Why or why not? Yes, I absolutely reread fiction. As a teacher of literature for almost 40 years, it was absolutely necessary for me to reread fiction. Anything that I was teaching is a work that I have read many times, and I would reread that work every time I taught it. So we're talking about things like Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, Shakespeare's Hamlet, Shakespeare's Macbeth, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Anything that I was teaching, I have read many times, and I wouldn't even dream of trying to teach something without actually being actively reading it at the moment. But there are also things that I reread, that I revisit just because they're kind of comfort reads. There are Agatha Christie novels that I reread. I've been rereading Miss Marple novels this past year. Those are just for fun. That's just a comfort read. Every now and then I come upon one I haven't read, but a lot of those are rereads. A book that I've never taught, but that I have reread countless times is Charles Dickens' Bleak House. I read this for the first time when I was a sophomore in college. And for some reason, every year, late fall, early winter, I want to reread this. And while I can't say I've reread it every year, I've read it a lot of times over the last 40 plus years, more than 40 years. The thing about rereading is that, as we grow and change and age, we bring different things to the text. I actually made a video about this last summer. Reading Ulysses for the third time was a very different experience for me reading it in my mid-60s than it was reading it in my early 20s. What was a powerful emotional experience for me in my 20s was a very, very different experience as a woman in her mid-60s. And I just think, we bring different life experiences to the text as we revisit it over time. Okay, number two, do you reread nonfiction? Why or why not? Maybe not as often as I reread fiction, but there are certainly genres of nonfiction that I do reread, and I'm going to address that in another prompt down below. Number three, if you reread fiction, what kind of fiction are you most likely to choose? Bestsellers, classical literature, genre fiction, that is fantasy, science fiction, mysteries, romance, westerns, adventure stories. What is your reason for the choice you've made? Well, a lot of the things that I reread are classics, and I reread them because there's a timelessness about them. They're well-written texts that speak to large, important themes. as I said, anything that I was teaching, that would be a reason for me to reread as well. Now, much of what I taught, would be considered classics, but not all. I taught a lot of contemporary literature too that hasn't had time yet to become classics. And then some things that I reread are purely for comfort. I haven't been a reader of science fiction and fantasy long enough yet to be a rereader, as I'm still reading widely in those genres for the first time. Okay. Number 4, if you reread nonfiction, what kind of nonfiction are you most likely to choose? Histories, biographies, autobiographies, memoirs, philosophy, science, theology, travel logs. What is your reason for the choice you've made, or the choices that you've made? Well, there is literary criticism that I've read and reread, and continue to revisit. Sometimes when I'm reading something, a classic that I've read before, I might go back and also revisit some lit crit, and a lot of it is stuff that I have read before. I have been reading widely in the field of psychoanalysis since I began studying in that field in my late 20s. So there are, seminal works in psychology and psychoanalysis that I have read and reread, and I continue to, both to read, new things that are coming out in the field, but also, I reread some of the really important seminal works. And I also, I love the memoir genre, and there are memoirs that I have revisited, largely because, I've just drawn inspiration from some of the lives that I've read about. And there also are some nature writers that I have read and reread, their essays, Emerson and Thoreau being two of them. Something also that isn't really addressed in any of these questions is poetry. I'm an avid reader of poetry, as I think I've probably made obvious on this channel, and there are poets, particular poets, that I read and reread, and I think everybody knows who they are, and I keep bringing them into the channel. Okay. Okay, number 5. If you've read a book which has been translated from another language, would you reread the same book in a newer or different translation? I absolutely would. I just finished reading The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, and we were reading the Michael Katz translation, and that, I think, is the newest translation, which I thought was a wonderful translation, but I had never read that before. So I don't have anything to compare it to, but I know that there are some other really wonderful translations, which I would absolutely be interested in reading at some point. And also last year, as I talked a great deal about reading Victor Hugo's Les Miserables for the first time, and I was reading the Doniger translation, which I thought was a wonderful translation, but I understand from my friend Sean D. Stanfast, there are many, many translations. I think he's read them all, and I would certainly be willing to try another translation of that. Okay. Number 6, how many times would you reread the same book? Well, books that I have taught, I've read and reread them 10, 15, 20 times. Hamlet, Macbeth, Pride and Prejudice, The Catcher in the Rye. I can't even tell you. I couldn't even estimate how many times I've read those. And again, I'm bringing different things to the text as I come back to these texts really throughout my reading, throughout my reading life. Okay, number 7. What is the most recent book you've reread? I think the most recent would be Lorraine Hansberry's play, A Raisin in the Sun. We read that with Angelia's drama reading group, Endless Drama. And A Raisin in the Sun is a play that I taught many years ago. So that was a reread for me. Also, in December, I read for the first time Leonard and Hungry Paul by Ronan Hession. And then I reread it last month because my book group selected it, and I wanted to be prepared for that discussion. So I read it again, even though I had just read it. And in November for Booktober, I did a deep dive into the works of Oscar Wilde. I think I read one play that I was reading for the first time, but I think everything else that I was reading was a reread, and that was really fun. And most of those were not things that I taught, but they were just things I had read at other times in my life. So I guess those would be the things that I've most recently reread. Okay, and then finally tag some friends. So if you're watching this and you'd like to jump into the discussion about rereading, I hope that you will make your version of this. In addition, in the notes, I'm going to include Robert's version and also Steve Donahue's version, because they both had really interesting things to say about rereading. And then, as I always do, I'm going to tag some people that I think would also be interested in jumping into this discussion. So, but please feel free to do this even if you're not tagged, because I think this is a really thought-provoking conversation. So, as always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.